Hello, true believers. Joel Clark here, lead designer of Lone Wolf Fists. I'm very sick today. I'm doing layout with Vic and working on backer styles. It's my day off, and I'm also under the weather. So I'm not as high energy as I like to be. Um, I'm also trying to get the last couple of backers who have not yet finished up their styles and get them in on stuff. So, oh god. So I came across, I've been doing searches for Lone Wolf Fist just kind of see what the general scuttlebutt about the game is. And I came across a thread that spanned over the two Kickstarters I did. The first one where it completely fell apart, and then the next one where we just barely made it. And like almost a 5K with that one, which I was pretty pleased with. Anyway, so I went to those two. I went to this thread. I think it was on like Board Game Geek or somewhere like that, and it was just two guys, and one of them was reasonably skeptical of my hyperbolic claims, and the other guy who was like, "Yeah, this is pretty much doomed," but like he was still kind of like generally optimistic. And I made an account and I invited them to the Fistiverse because they seem like two pretty cool characters. But the bottom line of the more negative guy was that like basically every single game promises to be all the stuff that my game promised to be, but nobody ever gets there. You need proof of that kind of claim, and that's fair. So what I wanted to do for you today, because the game's written now, we're doing editing and layout, like it's done, which is great. But what I wanted to do today was I wanted to go back to that Kickstarter page that I did and read through my little claims. And I wanted to see if my game did that, and like if I was able to like cite why and where it does that in the text itself. So that's my little project. I'm going to see if I actually did that, and that's about all I have energy to do. It's about 2:00 here, and I've pretty much exhausted myself doing editing and such today. So I'm gonna take the rest of the day off, basically. But I wanted to do this one little thing because it's stuck in my mind. I was like, that is a pretty good point. They are big claims that I made, and this game shot for the stars, man. It really did. So let's see. What is Lone Wolf Fist? Oh yeah, story: conquer the world or burn it. I love that. It's just a nice, pithy little tagline. High-powered RPG of martial arts set in the burning aftermath of Armageddon. Lone Wolf Fist offers. Okay, and here's the things I said that it offered. A jaw-pulping game experience. That's a little puffery. It doesn't actually hurt you in any way. With intuitive, detailed rules for fights, exploration, and world-conquering strategy. Yes, it has those things. It has... I don't know how intuitive the rules for fighting are, but the rules for conquering are based on the D&D old-school kind of like... Castle Blackmore style of playing stuff. Same thing with exploration. It's basically a hex crawl / dungeon crawl game that's just set outdoors. I've got a lot of experience running those games. I know how to prep them. I know how to run them. And then I translated all of that knowledge into rules and methods that are explicitly detailed in the book. And it's step by step, so even if you're a total rookie, you can do it. The same thing with the fights. There's a lot of examples in the fighting chapter. And there are a lot of rules for how fights work. And I don't know how intuitive they are. I think intuitive might be a bridge too far, because the Legends of the Wulin rules is what these are based off of. And those are a little weird, right? Like you have one big stat, and it's a pool of dice, and you roll them and match them to do different actions. So that's a little awkward to get used to. So I wouldn't call that intuitive necessarily. I would say for the most part, the skills do what you'd expect them to do. The agility makes you fast and nimble. Power makes you strong and able to lift stuff and break things. Endurance helps you to endure things. They pretty much do what they say on the tin, so that's intuitive. And the Kung Fu does, again, about what you would expect it to. If you have, like, a thing that lets you control fire, well, it does that. And almost all the Kung Fu is really explicit about what it lets you do. There's enough depth and nuance to it that I wouldn't call it purely intuitive. Sometimes you kind of have to see a technique in play to kind of understand its value. You're like, oh, okay, I actually have these trade-offs. But I think that it's easy enough to start playing pretty quickly. Like you get in, you get the premise, you make a character, you start rolling dice, and it all clicks pretty quickly. I've had a few people that really struggle with the opaqueness of the rules in some places, but I think that barring that, it's reasonably intuitive. So I think intuitive is the only word there that I feel not ashamed of, but I don't know if I sold that as well as I could have. So I don't know if intuitive is earned. Everything else is good, though. Here's another one. Slick, easy-to-learn mechanics engineered like a guided missile to rocket your players straight into the post-apocalypse. You can get playing in 5 minutes in my game. There's a lot of depth to the rules, and there's a lot of weird specificity that I had to detail so that players didn't just steamroll through the game. There's a lot of things like that where I found that giving them the power that I gave them, they could blow through a lot of content really quickly. And for the most part, what my job became was, how do I put roadblocks that aren't frustrating in front of the players so they feel like they're cool, but that the game still holds some challenge for them and gives them the option for in-game trade-offs. Do we ally with this guy? Do we fight this dude? Do we pull out the cursed artifact, or do we leave it there? Like, you need to have choices like that in a game, and that means that you have to have stakes and threats to a character, and you have to have stuff that isn't just going to break as soon as you look at it. So I had to re-engineer a world that was made of glass into one that was a lot more made of concrete. And I don't think the mechanics are particularly hard to learn. Honestly, a lot of people at this point have learned them and used them with incredible capability, so I'm going to say that I nailed that part. So good job, me. Oh god, that was too much physical exertion. I'm tired again. Okay, here we go. Strategic combat. It is super good combat that empowers players with over 200. Now, I initially said over 140. This says 200 unique kung fu techniques, offering tactical depth, creative approaches to conflict, and spine-shattering power. How many kung fu techniques are there in the game? Are there over 200? Are there? Because let me see. There's 3, 6, 9, 10, 11-ish per style, and there's 14 styles. There's 140. Where am I getting those other 60 from? I guess the backer styles. Let me see. I've got 10 per backer styles. I got 6 backers. No, there's over 200. It's just a little bit over 200. But yeah, that's with all the backer styles. I think I was... Wow, I guess... Well, okay, there's also the Gupt Kala. So I don't know. I did specify kung fu techniques. I don't know if the Gupt Kala are counted there. If you count the Gupt Kala, I think it's easily over 200, and it's barely over 200 as it stands. So that was a bit of puffery. Creative approaches to conflict and spine-shattering power. Okay, so they're supposed to offer tactical depth and creative approaches to conflict and spine-shattering power. So I have all 3 of those, so I did that. Okay. The number was high. I can't believe I did 200. I think maybe it's just 200 was rounder. Maybe I thought I was going to put more kung fu in it. I feel like 140 is probably good. Anyway, multiple paths to world conquest. Build relationships with mystical masters. You can exactly do that. Steal or win manuals of long-lost kung fu magic. Yep. Get drawn to of competing martial brotherhoods. Yes. Slay terrifying demons of the post-apocalypse. Or some new bidding. Yep, you can do all that stuff. Okay, cool. I can do all that. That's exactly that stuff. Mutants, demons, tanks, and T-Rexes swarm through a world of horror and adventure. Smash them into goo or take them for a ride in your violent quest for world domination. Yep, you can do all that stuff. I did the bestiary, I did the armory, and those 2 chapters allow you to do all that stuff. Again, that puts the power in your fists by treating both rules knowledge and skillful role-playing as deadly weapons in your arsenal. I do that. But I would like to point out that's not exactly some kind of magical feat of game design. That's just describing what a role-playing game is. See, you can make a board game that gives your players a lot of power and allows them to bring in their out-of-game knowledge and their actual skills at problem-solving and tactical trade-offs and things like that and long-term planning, blah, blah, and use all of those skills to succeed. A role-playing game lets you do that as well, but it has open borders. A board game is totally enclosed within the elements of the game itself, but a role-playing game, because it appeals to this broader universe that exists outside of the explicit dictates of its mechanics, allows players creativity that they cannot have in a board game. So it adds in that creativity. And my game very explicitly says there's nothing you can't accomplish with role-playing, with talking in character and making good points, that can't be accomplished on the chart that lets you do that mechanically, and vice versa. It goes both ways, and you are supposed to allow whichever is the most powerful to lead is the GM. Those are instructions that are explicit to the GM. If they have a really high roll and they don't have a good point, then the roll wins. If they have a great point but don't really have the dice to match it up, well, the point is still the stronger and you would go with that. So it does actually explicitly instruct the GM to empower players. Now, individual GMs can run their game however the hell they want to, but that's how I told them to run it. So, you can't blame me for trying. So yeah, I do that. I actually did that one. And rules knowledge is actually useful in this game. The more actual rules knowledge you have, the more effectively you can build and use characters, and the more you can squeeze out of the techniques. And it's kind of built that way almost by accident, just because the way I design things, I never want something to do one thing only. I always want it to be like something that's useful in a specific circumstance, but it has a broader application, and it has like a secret application. And that's just kind of the way I think. And so every time I design a kung fu move, it always has like a million different ways to use it. And there are extremely useful ways to get a lot of blood out of that stone if you know how to squeeze it properly. So you can do that stuff. I did that bullet point. A complete and immersive game experience combining deep roleplay, challenging combat, high-stakes action, exploration of a deadly hellscape, and much, much more. Yes. The lore chapter and the bestiary chapter, and the way you make NPCs and you make villains, and the way hazards exist in this world, it makes for an extremely deadly setting. So you can just going through this backwards. Exploration of a deadly hellscape, yes. If you just wanted to go from place to place and deal with the hellscape stuff, it's all there, right there in the lore chapter. It's easy to make, and there's explicit, easy-to-use instructions for making it. So that's a thing I did. High-stakes action, yeah. I mean, of course. Like, you can die in this game. You can die in most games. I mean, like, D&D has high-stakes action. Like, every game has high-stakes action. If you could die in a combat, the stakes are pretty goddamn high, you know? I mean, more than that, if you don't kill certain bad guys or don't find a way to stop them, they can destroy a lot more than just you. They can blow up the whole goddamn world. So those are much higher stakes than I'm going to get stabbed by goblins. So I would say that qualifies as high-stakes action. Challenging combat, yeah. The combat can be really hard. Like, I've had combats that took the characters to the breaking point in playtests. So, yeah, and they were able to succeed, too. It's not like it's a foregone conclusion just because it's hard or deadly or has consequences. So even beyond challenging, it's consequential combat, which I think is really good. A complete and immersive game experience, that doesn't mean anything. What does a complete and immersive game experience mean? Nothing. That's just puffery. I mean, like, every game that you play is, by definition, a complete and immersive experience and a game. So it's a tautology. There's no... I called that... I used big words because I wanted another bullet point. And it combines deep roleplay. So, okay, the roleplay can't be any deeper than the players and the GM are willing to commit to, right? You can reward deep roleplay in the mechanics, and I do. And I have an XP system that rewards roleplay, so there's that. And by roleplay, I mean taking on a role and the values of that role, and choosing to take actions that aren't necessarily tactically hugely beneficial, but are characterful for a character. Like, that's role-playing. And you can encourage and incentivize that, which is what I did, but you can't force people to do it. So I can't force them to do it, but I can incentivize them to it, and I can reward them for it, which I do both of those things really well. So I'm going to say that as much as you can guarantee those things or structure your game such as that you are encouraging them, I've done that. So yeah, aside from the 200 Kung Fu techniques, there's at least 140, and I think with the backer styles, we might actually be over 200. I hit all of it. I did all those things. Oh my god. Ugh. I need more water. I don't know what this is, but it's not manifesting very well. Ugh, I feel sick as a dog. And try the sample game before you pledge. I remember that. How is this different from other games? I think this is the paragraph that umbrage was taken with. Lone Wolf Fist doesn't trade off between immersive, impactful role-playing, creative problem-solving, exploration of a strange and compelling world, tactically rich combat, and long-term strategic play. It does it all with a fully scalable system that cleanly and intuitively encompasses everything from shriveled mutants dragging themselves to the searing landscape to kung fu demigods that shatter mountainsides. with their awesome attacks. Okay, so that was, I think that's one sentence. Christ, I've got to learn to stop doing that. Okay, so here's the claim. I don't trade off. I don't know what I mean by that. Between role-playing, problem-solving, exploration, combat, and long-term play. Which is to say, I have a game in which all of those things have a consideration for your character as you're playing it. So you're a character in Lone Wolf Fist. You're part of a party in Lone Wolf Fist, and you're in a scenario. You can engage with it in a way that allows you to roleplay your character in a rewarding way. You can use creative problem solving. The tactical infinity is very well defined in this game, and GMs are routinely not only encouraged but given a lot of tools to make it something that can manifest in the game. So that is actually very true. The creative problem solving is it's like one of the critical elements that allows this game to function. Exploration of a strange, compelling world. Yeah, if you explore new places, there's stuff there. There's kung fu manuals. There's teachers. There's resources. There's dangers. There's a reason to explore that is tactical, and it does enhance both the tactically rich combat and long-term strategic play. And fighting makes things happen in this game. It's not a sport. It's a war, and because it's a war, you can win it. And when you win it, it's conclusive. If you kill the, 14,000 Morning Widow's Raven slaughter, then he's dead. His reign of terror is over. The end. You don't have to worry about that guy anymore. And there's an entire system in the game, the domain system, which not only allows you to have a domain, but also early in the game, before you have a chance in hell of really having a domain, it's still informing how the game is presented to you. This army is marching at us. Why? It's not because of the plot, it's because 14,000 Grieving Widows Raven Murder has an army and he wants to conquer this place. That's why. That's an action he took on a domain scale, and it's trickling down and bleeding down into the scene-to-scene playing of the game. And the amount of time you take to deal with that has strategic ramifications. So, that was hard to write, okay? That was a really difficult... Oh, God. Just a second. That was a really difficult system to put together. And to put it together in a way that both paced the game at the higher level and allowed it to be its own kind of game that you wanted to interact with at that level, and also that it bled back into the scene structure in the earlier type of gameplay, so that it informs every leg of how you play Lone Wolf Fist. And it does so in a way that isn't intrusive and bothersome, but in a way that actually feels right. And although it does admittedly have a few gamey quirks, for example, the more powerful the action or the bigger the army you're moving, the longer it takes, and so the lower in the scene structure it is. So a lot of so it fits sort of a traumatic arc where everything's kind of telegraphed earlier on, and then it escalates throughout a campaign arc. Okay, yeah, things don't actually work like that in real life, but they kind of do. If you have a really big project, it takes longer to get off the ground, and there's signs of it before that happens. So that's one thing. And another thing is that, magic and fate and luck is real in this world. And so, it kind of, the world as it exists kind of naturally falls into the sort of, anime and wuxia tropes that we would recognize as an audience as tropes of the genre. But that's just how their reality works. So I'm fine with it. It's a little gamey, but it makes for a really good system that does all those things. So yeah, and the trick to doing all of that, all the stuff that's in that paragraph, is just making sure everything outlined in that paragraph has enough weight in the game to matter. The role-playing matters, as I've stated before. You are incentivized for it and rewarded for it. Creative problem-solving is a tool that is something that is accessible and intuitive for players. That you can look at the effect charts, you can look at the hazards, you can look at your own kung fu, and you can look at things like vehicles or monsters and different elements of the setting, like even just things like deposits of resources like oil, have mechanics, and they're not super complicated, but there's enough that you can actually interact with all of them, and they all fit together in the way you'd imagine they would. So like, if you have a lot of oil, you can set it on fire and burn stuff with it, or you can harvest it and sell it to people who want to do that, and it makes cars work. Like there's a really simple, cars take this much fuel per scene to work. That's a really simple rule, right? It's really easy to take care of gas as far as like tracking it. Where does it come from? How much does it cost? That's answered by these systems. And again, none of them are super complicated, but they're all there. And they're all there within about 300 pages worth of text, granted, but they are all there. And it's easy enough to flip to the appropriate section and look it up. And it's easy enough to prep all this stuff as you're instructed to in the game itself. And to make your world and to lay it out and have the consequences kind of manifest themselves. So, yeah, it was really hard to do all of those things, but I'm not really breaking that much ground. For the most part, this has existed in the Arnisian style of running games since the beginning of the hobby. The difference is there's a Alexander Macris-esque advancement that really he did whenever he did Adventure and Conquer King. That's just kind of about like thinking about all these different elements, not just in terms of like writing them down in the setting, but also in terms of like numericizing them and giving them enough mechanical weight that a player can look at them as a strategic resource. So it's not just this is the castle of Saint Bernard of Doggo. This is all off the top of my head. Don't judge me. I'm very sick right now. Like you can recreate that castle, or you can look at it and kind of estimate how much money it would be to build that, and by that you can kind of infer how powerful Saint Bernard of Doggo is. Like, he's not some pushover. This guy has 1 million gold to spend on his castle. Well, gold equals XP in old school D&D. So if he has 1 million gold, that means he got 1 million XP at some point. He had that to play with. So Saint Bernard of Doggo is a level 14, like badass, like King Arthur level superhuman. So yeah, we probably shouldn't fuck with this guy. And Macris is a particular genius for doing those sort of things in his game, and I was like deeply inspired by that, because like I came out of the Exalter tradition where all that stuff was abstracted. Whether you had 1 dot of resources or 5 dots of resources determined how much gold you had. It was all abstract. It wasn't, you aren't just counting gold pieces. That's for idiots who don't know how reality works, because this is all about like complicated credit systems and barter and blah 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 and trade negotiate. Like, it abstracted so much that it stopped making any kind of coherent sense whatsoever, and at the table that translated to not being able to use it. Like, eventually everyone had 5 dots and resources, because you come across a first stage treasure trove filled with gold and jewels and pearls at a diclave, which is worth more than all of those things put together, and you would just put that on your character sheet. I'm like, oh, just add +1 to your resources. I could do that up to 5 times if someone started out with none. Then they have 5 resources, and anytime there's a problem with money, they just use their resources to solve it immediately, because there's no tracking at all. And so they added wealth in Dreams of the First Age, which it added like 5 more ranks and just further escalated it to ever more nonsensical levels. So it's just like, just put a number to it, man. If you put a number to it, we can talk about it in more concrete terms. Macris also had the genius of looking at actual medieval economies, and he's not the only guy who did that. Like, the RPG Pundit did that too. A lot of people looked at actual, the actual price lists and things like that. They actually looked at how medieval economies were set up and said, okay, we can base our fantasy elf game economies off of these, and let's see if that makes sense in terms of people generating income and how much that would do. And like, it was really nifty for them to go and do all of that work. But the end result of that is that you have a world that it functions as a strategic resource for the players. My only add to that body of work, and you have to understand, this is a body of work that a lot of people have contributed to. I'm just the beneficiary of all of their genius and hard work. All the way since David Arneson. We kind of all are, really. But the only thing I really added to that was thinking of it in terms of evoking from a description. So if you have just a setting description in your mind as a GM, you can use that as the foundational bedrock for creating that kind of prep. And I do that. I demonstrate to players, or I demonstrate to GMs how to do that with their prep consistently. And then in the lore chapter, which is the last one that I just did, I give them a lot of examples of how to do that. So here's what this like Panku, the Last Jungle, is. This is what it's like. And then there's just these lists of this is something you could find, and this is something you could find, and this is what a society might be like, and that's what a society might be like, and this is a monster you might run into, and here's some terrain you might encounter, and here's some resources you might find. And by putting all of those things there and showing GMs like, hey, look, if you just put these together and you just make an explanation for why all of these interesting elements exist in close proximity, you've made something that might as well have been written by me in exquisite detail. It has all the functional elements. All it needs is your imagination to bring it to life. So I guess this is a roundabout way of saying that if you just... I don't think that paragraph was never achieved before me. It's like you could buy the Adventure Conqueror King system and you basically have everything there. Like, because the Adventure Conqueror King also has like really good combat because it beefs up what the fighter can do, and it leans into hit points as the major player resource. And because it's a theater of the mind game, which is really ultimately what mine is, with the way it's just got description-based combat, and because it, like every other old school RPG, has an understanding of the tactical infinity and the shared mind space, you really already have that game. Like, it's really just up to you to understand those principles and apply them as a GM to actually make your tables do that with most games that exist. The games that are designed to optimally capture it mostly exist in the OSR, old school Renaissance, D&D retro clones and things like that. And there's a lot of modern ones that do it. Like Merkborg is one that does. I played some of that at a recent convention. Online convention, but still a convention, and it was really fun. Like it's kind of like Lamentation of the Flame Princess, which is to say it's a pretty gritty version of the old school rules, but there's a lot of character boosts and power boosts that I wasn't expecting, even at like very, very low levels. So it was pretty nifty. And it's optimized. It's optimized to take into account that the world can be evoked into the mechanics, rather than the mechanics being used to define the entirety of the world. And if you understand that, you understand that you've had games that do that. They don't really trade off between role-playing and tactically rich combat and long-term strategic play. Those games existed and predate my game. Like, that's not a holy grail. You just have to know how to make a game do that. And a designer has to understand that they have to do that. There's more than a few of those games, and I just mentioned a couple of them to you if you want to check them out. But it's going to be on you as a GM to make them do that. A designer can only make so much for an RPG before you've got to kind of pick up the slack. So my game does that too, but critically it does it in the same way. This is not a box of elements that you can just assemble and expect it to do what it says in the tin. You're going to have some art in your soul to make it work. And I tell you how to make that happen. Like, I give really good GM advice in here, like pages and pages, a whole chapter of it basically. But again, it's gonna be on you to make sure that all works that way. All the pieces are there, but I mean, like, that's like saying, all the notes are there. Why isn't this an orchestra? Well, because an orchestra is more than notes on a page, right? You need the skill of the players. You need a conductor. You need them all to fuse together and become more than the sum of their parts. Well, it's the same way with this. And yeah, that might be a little bit of a cop-out, but like also, it's true, isn't it? I can't come and GM at your table for you. Like, I promise you that if I did that at your table, it would be a blast, and it always is when I run this game. Or on most games, honestly. But like, it does do this. It's just maybe it doesn't do it in a way that you expected. Okay. Anyway, that was the paragraph I really wanted to answer, and I wanted it to answer that way. Jesus, I'm gonna die over here. Build a character within minutes. Unleash your creativity with thousands of unique character builds. There's probably tens of thousands. I'd have to do the math, but there's probably quite a few more than thousands. Play in a game that rewards both system mastery and creative approaches to play. It does do that. Earn your victories and keep your spoils in a campaign system optimized for short-term fun and long-term play. It is. Experience true character and power growth in an evolving and challenging tactical landscape. Yeah, I don't really know how much the world changes because of your influence in it. I mean, like, I guess it does, kind of. But, like, I don't have any explicit mechanics that say, and now the stakes are raised in a campaign. Like, that's kind of... I mean, I kind of do. You know, as you get more powerful, the scope of what you can influence kind of just naturally increases geographically. And because I have geographic-based prep, that pulls in ever larger areas, which means two things. More enemies that have a stake in kicking your ass and having you die, and deadlier enemies, because there are really deadly enemies in this game. Like the Titans and like 7th and higher degree NPCs, they're so powerful it's unbelievable. And so you're more likely to run into those as your little territory expands, especially as you become more of a threat to those entities. They're ever more likely to want to show up and end you while you're still weak enough that they can. So yeah, I guess that kind of works. I mean, again, that's a bit of a cop-out answer, but good enough. This game delivers on the promise of its premise. Be a kung fu demigod and sear across the graveyard of the world. Yeah, you can do that. And do it all quickly and intuitively. Again, I don't know if I've earned intuitive, but you can do it quickly. With a fun, straightforward, and richly rewarding game system. Well, okay. Full confession, I don't know that it's straightforward. There's 300 pages of rules. It's not unusable. Like, the rules are designed to be usable, right? And they're designed to be teachable, and I spent a pretty good amount of those 300 pages just kind of talking about the rules and what you're supposed to do with them. That being said, I don't know how straightforward that is. I don't have a straightforward thought process, as you can probably tell from this almost 40-minute long rant. But I can't guarantee that it's straightforward. I have designed it and written it, and we're editing it and getting it in layout to make it as straightforward as possible. As much as possible, the idea is that you should be able to read from the first page to the last page and have a cohesive and comprehensible experience that teaches you what this game is about. And that's going all the way down to the depths of my philosophy as a game designer, which I've expounded on here, and also into the nitty-gritty of like how the system works and how you value different things, and all of the options and all of the lore, such as it is. Because remember, the lore is just in those charts in the lore chapter. There's not a whole bunch of text about it. It's just, here's something that might happen, here's something that might happen. And that's maybe not the most satisfying straight-through read, but like in play, it's very useful to have those charts there. So is it straightforward and is it intuitive? I would say within the boundaries of its unbelievably high standards for what it's including and what it's trying to do, it is as straightforward and intuitive as I could realistically make it. There's a couple of hiccups and quirks. This is my first really big game. That's just unavoidable. But they're pretty minor, I think, whenever you read the whole thing. And I think that the weaknesses of earlier writing are buoyed by the strengths of later writing, and kind of vice versa. There's a lot of energy in the early writing that got kind of like more nuanced in the later writing. And I think that early energy still bleeds through in a lot of those sections. So for the most part, I think that I don't think that if I was going to do this again, I would use the terms intuitive or straightforward. I will say that. I would also probably count the kung fu techniques before I claim there were over 200. I'm not actually sure there's over 200. There's probably right at 200. And I don't know. Maybe I just wouldn't have specified techniques. Maybe I would have just said powers. Because if you add all of the Gup Kala, they have a good 10 powers each. That's another 70. So that's over 200. So okay, I would say powers other than techniques there. I would still claim over 200. Because damn it, I put 200 in. Oh, goodness. One of the things in Risk and Challenges is the scope of the game is enormous. We've included an old-school approach to running with comprehensive advice based on playtesting. This should allow fledgling GMs to begin playing and running their own campaign with confidence. Yes, I keep using the word intuitive. Because new game systems are a large investment of time and mental resources, we've made every pain to keep this game readable and usable in the extreme. That's true, we did do that. And not just me, like there's a team behind doing that. The core game mechanics and the gameplay loop they reinforce have been written, tested, rewritten, and now rewritten a third time, and exhaustively optimized. That is true. That did happen. They should be direct, comprehensive, and intuitive both for GMs and players. Well, I don't know if they're intuitive. Let's see. Yeah, I think we've answered the majority of the questions there. The most disputed paragraph, I think I'm able to answer with confidence in the affirmative. If I had to give myself a percentage that I got for the game that I wanted to make, like the percentage that it is towards like the ideal perfect dream game, it's probably in the low 90%. I would have liked to have had more styles at the end of the day. I honestly, you can't put enough Kung Fu styles in a game about Kung Fu, right? And I would have liked to have made way bigger chapters for the bestiary and the armory. I would have liked to have had, like, and the original scope on those was hundreds of entries. So I would have liked to have actually been able to pull through all of that. At the end of the day, what we gave you were extremely, immediately usable examples of type. So instead of having 10 different kinds of tanks, I have one kind of tank, but it's very much a tank. You can use it to stand in for most main battle tanks from any era of human history or your own made-up variety. And it works really well for that. And if you wanted to do Dominion Tank Police, where you have like more advanced tanks and less advanced tanks, but they have some kind of weird retro future tech on them or something, okay, well maybe you'll have to do a little bit of work to make that happen. But like, it's not so much work that it's going to be like indescribably difficult, you know? Just a little tweak here and there. And there's enough different examples of vehicles that you can probably find a couple that are close enough to tanks that you can kind of like, you can make it work, just fudging a number here or there. So I would have liked to have had more content. If I had it to do over again, like I would probably rewrite it a fourth time. Because I am a gormless perfectionist, and I would take everything I've written so far and I would very carefully rewrite all the sections that seemed a little too lengthy or awkward, and I would carefully fuse all the different rules in exactly the right place and everything. I'm doing some of that, by the way, in the tech edit, so I might retract that after the tech edit and be like, no, it's perfect now. Y'all are doomed. But no, oh god, I'm gonna hit the can after this. This sucks. But yeah, low 90%. Low 90%. I'm not feeling too. I would have liked to have more art too. Kazuki did some really cool art for me, but there's a lot of artists that worked on this, and I would have liked to have had 4 times this budget, so I could have paid them more. It would have been nice to have like full color layout too, and like a really sexy spread, but like it wasn't in the cards this time. We had to do black and white, which is fine. But like, but I mean, it would have been cool, right, to have full color. Oh, it would have been cool. Overall, I got the clans in there I wanted. I got the powers I wanted. I got the skills I wanted. I got all the chapters I wanted. The armory is actually really complete. So is the bestiary. Like, those really needed to happen. The lore chapter almost killed me, but it really works. Like, I even got to playtest that and do an in-house playtest with it. And it was glorious. So I'm really glad I took the extra couple of months to finish those, because they deserve to be in the game, and I'm really glad they're there. The fighting works like I want it to. You know what, that's probably the 2 things I'm proudest of in this game, is that the fighting works the way I want it to. It's quick and it's fun, and there's real actual trade-offs and consequences, and it's just exceptionally fucking cool and cinematic. And it's cinematic, like, it evokes a cinematic world because there's consequentiality to the way attacks manifest and what they do. So I'm really proud of that. I think I did a really good job with that. It's not perfect, but like it's as close to perfect as I could make it. And I'm really happy with it. And the second thing is I love the effect charts. I think that borrowing those, the idea of those from Marvel Face Rip, and using them as I did, as a thing that faces the tactical infinity and informs not only like what you can do, but also kind of informs what things should look like whenever you're setting them as a GM. That was some of the most robust design I've ever seen in an RPG. Period. It's maybe not brilliant, but it's the most brilliant thing that I've ever kind of retrofitted into a game before, and I'm really proud of them. If I had them to do over again, I would probably add even more tiers than there already are. And I'd probably think of a more elegant way to cap off the top part of it than just saying, like, no, not unless you have super magic beyond this point. That's a little bit of a cop-out. It was really kind of a stopgap solution that sort of just got codified in the rules. So if I had it to do over again, I would probably not put it on a single scalar. I'd have to think of something a little more clever to do. But as far as, like, does it work and does it make the game I want? Yes and yes. So my own complaints for the inelegance of it are going to have to get tabled whenever you actually look at it and realize that it does exactly what you want it to do. So yeah, it's maybe not the most elegant thing I've ever designed, but as far as being good and usable and making the best game it possibly could, and the game that fulfills the promises here, man, I'm proud of that. Those two things alone are probably like the thing that that are going to put the game on the map in terms of like the impact it has on other games and the way people think about design. I think those are going to be really important. Geez, I'm trying to pad this out to 45 minutes now. I think I'm just going to stop it. Maybe I'll do a little song and dance for the last 4 minutes. Oh, nope, can't stand up. Never mind. Ugh. I was going to sing a More Humane Mikado from the eponymous Mikado, which is one of my favorite Gilbert and Sullivan songs. The actual play is amazing as far as Gilbert and Sullivan goes. It's pretty fun, and it's got some extremely memorable pieces in it, but that's my favorite one. So I was going to do that, but I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to drink this water and regret getting sick with whatever made me sick. Anyway, I hope that, because I feel like I've satisfied myself at the end of the day with this game, and I hope that whenever people pick it up, whatever method you get it, I hope that you agree with me. I hope that you hold it in your hands and you look through it and you spend a couple afternoons reading it, and it speaks to you the same way it spoke to me, and it inspires you the same way it's inspired me, and it does. Whenever I reread this game, I feel excited about it. I feel like I want to run games in this world, and I feel like I can. I feel empowered to do so. And when players have there's a dog barking outside. That's gonna wreck this whole video. But when players are given the powers of creating a character in this, they feel excited. When they play it, they feel cool. And it's not a one-off thing, because games can do that in a lot lighter weight than this game has. But it's not a one-off thing. The problem with a game that makes you feel cool and empowered and all that. Did I mention this is one of the highest crime rate cities in the United States? Just for the record. So if you're hearing a bunch of like gang war stuff happening out there, that would be why. The point I'm trying to make is that like you can make a game that's really cool and fun and quick to play and a lot lighter and a lot easier to read and run. But I don't think that those games have longevity. I think for the most part they don't have a long-term orientation at their core. And this game does. It's supposed to be something you can play and play again and again and again, and make your own worlds and your own legends with. And I feel like it does that. And I hope you're excited enough to do that, and that the difficulties of consistently running a game of this complexity are rewarding for you instead of frustrating. because I understand that they can become frustrating. I've ran many very complex games in the past, and they can get a little boggy. And I think there's a little bit of that with this one too. It might be inescapable just because of the amount that's designed into it. But I hope ultimately that it winds up being worth that investment for you, whoever you are. As I feel it's worth it for me. Anyway, that's our 45 minutes, folks. Thanks for coming on this journey with me, and I'll see you next Kickstarter.